I'm going to introduce our two presenters now. Dr. Rebecca Story is a clinical psychologist for cancer services at Waitemata DHB. So Rebecca works with people with cancer every day and is well aware of the issues that many people experience. She's going to talk to us about what anxiety is, how it affects us, and share some techniques that we can have in our toolbox. So things we can use to deal with anxiety when it affects us. And Louise Bobbitt is a clinical nurse specialist in oncology at Auckland City Hospital, caring for women with breast cancer, and she'll be known to some of you in that role. As well, Louise is a mindfulness practitioner, and during today's presentation, Louise will talk about mindfulness as a tool for managing anxiety, and we're actually going to practice some exercises together. So there's going to be some moments of quiet as we do this. So I'll just share the screen with the presentation. Here we go. Fingers crossed we're working here. Okay, can we all see the presentation?
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'm trying to get rid of the sidebar, that's the only thing, but we're not doing that today. We won't worry about it. Okay. From the beginning, start the slideshow. Come on. Okay, I'll leave it to hand to you, Louise, I think, because you're going to start first and I'll keep fiddling with the screen sharing thing. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So we're actually going to start with taking a bit of a breathing space. So just so we can get ourselves into the right place and the right feeling for what we're going to be talking about as it comes up. So if it's okay, I'm just going to invite you to get yourselves into a comfy position. So just relaxing yourselves in the chair and moving yourselves a little bit. And if you can, just putting your feet flat on the floor. And perhaps just resting your hands gently in your lap. And maybe just taking a few deep breaths. And gently allowing your gaze to look down towards the floor, or allowing your eyes to close if that's comfortable for you right now. And just settling into your body. And as you're taking those conscious breaths, on each out breath, just noticing how you feel your muscles softening and loosening, relaxing and releasing. And then allowing your breath to find its own depth and rhythm now. Just allowing it to breathe itself. And becoming aware of the space before your eyes. And perhaps it's like a field of darkness. You might see some muted shapes. Or just resting your attention on where your eyes are looking now, with a relaxed and soft gaze. And then bring your attention to any sounds coming to you from outside, or any sounds to you from inside the room. Just simply listening with a gentle curiosity. Allow the sounds to call your attention into the present moment, just listening. And now open your awareness to your breath. Just notice the feeling of the breath as you breathe in and as you breathe out. Just feel the air moving over the end of your nose, the slight movement of your chest and your belly, rising with the in-breath and sinking with the out-breath. Just notice the feeling of each breath, your natural breathing, following each breath. And if you notice your attention wandering or becoming caught up in a stream of thought, that's okay. Just simply bring your attention back to the next breath. Being aware of the feeling of the breath again. And notice the sounds as you rest your attention in the space in front of your eyes. And as we come towards the end of this meditation, just allowing your breathing to become a little bit stronger, perhaps a bit deeper. Starting to reactivate your body by moving your fingers and toes. And then when you're ready, just slowly opening your eyes.
Thank you, Louise.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca.
I kind of, after Jenny sent through quite a few questions on, what areas people were wanting to hear about, hopefully I've kind of devised this presentation to answer some of those questions. But if there are any more questions, like Jenny said, please don't hesitate to send them through on that kind of chat. And then if we do have time at the end, we can answer those. If not, we're happy for Jenny to send them through to myself and Louise, and we can try and answer them as best as we can. So I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. This is the first time I've done a presentation on Zoom, and I do have a quiet voice, so hopefully, everybody can hear me okay. Next slide, please, Jenny.
Oh, hang on. Having a technical issue here. Oh no, there we go. No, we've done that one.
Okay, so that's the one Louise has just done.
Now we're there.
Okay, awesome. So I think the point that I wanted to start with really was just about the point of the presentation is very much about normalizing anxiety, in life generally, but also at times of, more challenge. And I think I wanted people to come away from this presentation knowing that actually anxiety is or the experience of anxiety is a natural response to facing challenges that are infused with any elements of danger or uncertainty. So, I wrote their natural, normal responses to challenge because I know that often a lot of people feel that anxiety is something that we shouldn't be experiencing. It means there's a problem. But really, anxiety is something that is really just alerting our body to the fact that we're facing something that we feel challenged about. So I'm hoping by the end of this presentation that we can come away with understanding a bit more about what anxiety is, but also knowing that there's actually something that we can do about it. Next slide, Jenny. So, I imagine for all of you, some of the most common issues faced that evoke lots of feelings, but particularly anxiety, are listed there. So obviously, hearing the news about getting a diagnosis of cancer, but ongoing medical appointments and blood tests, scans and scan anxiety. I know that people kind of probably heard that word quite a lot. Can be ongoing for many, many years for a lot of people. And in those times of medical appointment, there are often times where we face more uncertainty than others. And people often will, be aware that our thinking tends to pop up, and the thoughts that tend to pop up the most when we're faced with times of uncertainty is that what if scenario. What if the doctors say, what if treatment gets changed? And often those thoughts, when we talk about facing challenge or threats, quite often the things that we're facing through a cancer diagnosis and treatment is we're often facing not just real threats, but often perceived threats as well, and that's where those what ifs come in. So the other things that we know can be difficult to try and manage, as well as trying to manage symptoms, but also treatment side effects, pain, fatigue, is also trying to figure out how do we manage this, as well as still working, still studying. And often that can evoke some stress when we're trying to figure out how do we change our career, how do we alter our hours of working, which ultimately might affect our finances. Sorry, Jenny. Oh. Sorry, I'll just continue until Jenny
fixes
so what
this.
we know.
You carry on and I'll fix it.
All right, no problem. Okay, I'll just. So what we know that does, that can evoke, lots of feelings, especially, anxious feelings that, can affect, times of uncertainty. And we know that it can affect changes in our relationships. But what we know is that anxiety often can be a normal feeling that is evoked when we're faced with a situation that is challenging or uncertain, or puts us in a place of danger or threat. So the next slide would be it's around kind of there we are, perfect. So often when we think about anxiety, we think about it as a continuum. And it's important, just like any other emotion, that we can go from mild anxiety or stress to something that's a bit more significant. So when we look at kind of mild anxiety, we're really looking at kind of everyday worries that might come with completing an assignment at work, or we've got a deadline at university. And we often know that those natural feelings of stress are really there to motivate us. So they're there to pump our body with a little bit of energy so it gets the task done, basically. Further along the continuum, we're obviously looking at something that's a bit more moderate. So we're looking at a heightened bodily experience, but also some behavior changes that often can be noticed by other people. So some of those changes might be, people can notice that we're a bit more disorganized, we're feeling a little bit more irritable, we don't maybe cope with situations that we would do normally, we can maybe be slightly more forgetful, or the one that tends to be the most problematic is often having difficulties making decisions or making sense of what's happening. Then obviously to the other end of the continuum, we talk a bit more about anxiety when it becomes a little bit more severe, and that really is about when those experiences can really interrupt our daily lives, and they can start restricting some of the stuff that we really want to do. And often, despite wanting to do something, quite often when that experience of anxiety can be quite heightened into our body, or those unhelpful thoughts can be spinning around in our minds, despite wanting to do something, those things can often hold us back. So, despite wanting to go for a blood test, sometimes, we feel that we're unable to do that, and we might avoid the situation, or not facing medical appointments, not wanting to answer the phone, not wanting to talk about cancer or cancer treatment. So, often most people might be kind of in that middle scale. I tend not to use the words like anxiety disorder, but often we do know that at times we can kind of pop in and out of the kind of more extreme one. And we know that extreme anxiety, or the experience of anxiety, can also affect our mood. Next slide, please, Jenny. So hopefully you can see the writing on the right hand side despite having the cameras there, the pictures there, but I can read it anyway.
Just Rebecca, they can drag the little camera and they can move it to another part of the screen.
All right, perfect. So probably most of you have heard of the fight, flight or freeze response. You know, so just like, you know, what we talked about before about the experience of anxiety being on a continuum, the underlying response is basically the same. So when we think about the fight, flight response, the reason I wanted to talk about it, which, you know, I'm sure that a lot of you have heard about it before, I think if we understand this process and understand how it affects how we think and how we feel and our behavior, I think when it makes sense, it just helps us to understand why people like Louise or myself might be suggesting certain strategies. You can understand why that might be helpful as opposed to just, this is a strategy to help you understand why, what's the purpose behind it. So basically the fight flight response is a natural reaction. So it's part of our automatic response designed to protect us from any harm. So this response is evoked when being confronted or faced with real threats, but also perceived threats. So we might find that we all associate with one of these responses because often these can, you know, relate to, you know, personality or previous life experiences, or where we are in life at the minute. So there might be some of us who tend to react more in the flight response and others who might be more in the fight response. So looking at the fight response, just really quickly, you know, when people see those you know, pictures of animals that relate to what fight, flight or freeze is, people would tend to use the picture of the lion because they're the ones that will do the fighting. And people will normally use this response, the fight response, when people feel that they're able to defend themselves and deal with that threat and survive. The flight response is obviously the running away, and people use the deer as something in terms of analogy, and often we'll use that response when we feel that we can overcome the threat that's right in front of us and survive. The freeze response is something that's not talked about quite as much, but again, they use the analogy of a rabbit, that often if we feel like we can't fight the threat and survive, but we can't run away and survive either, it's best just to freeze and hopefully that threat will move away. And we know often that people describe that freeze response as it's something that happens when we typically in that bad news scenario that we don't know if we can survive the threat by fighting or fleeing. We often go into shock and maybe just freeze. Next slide, please, Jenny. So to understand the fight, flight or freeze response, I've really just kind of put that diagram to show that there's a pathway that happens when we are in that perceiving a threat or a real threat. So the first thing that happens is, in terms of that stress response, is that, and we'll go into these in a bit more detail, is that our brains are basically alerted, or the emotional part of our brain, which is the limbic system. And what happens is that there's two parts of our brain, we'll talk a bit more about them, but you can see in the green is the amygdala, and the hippocampus is just beside it. So they're really small parts of our brain, but they actually have a really important function in our experience of anxiety. So those kind of parts, two parts of our brain are kind of fired up really, and they automatically release hormones into our body. And then what happens is that those hormones basically do quite a few things to our body that changes how our body is working. Some of them automatic, that we actually can't do anything about. But I'm sure, you know, when we talk about them, people would have experienced a lot of these changes before. And I know one of the questions that Jenny had was about what happens to our brain when we experience anxiety. So hopefully, by talking about these next couple of slides, that might answer the question. Next slide, please, Jenny. So what I have here is just basically kind of two main bits of the brain, or part of our limbic system. So the amygdala and the hippocampus are the two parts that are probably the things that are most associated with anxiety. So the amygdala is just a really small kind of almond-shaped structure in our brain. And basically when we're exposed to any real or perceived fearful stimuli, sensory information is basically sent to the amygdala, which then sends signals straight away to the hippocampus, and that then sends signals straight away to our body that we're in that fight or flight response. This is done through the autonomic nervous system, which controls involuntary body functions such as our breathing or heart rate. So basically already we can see that start of that pathway when we have that perceived or real threat, which sends signals to our brain through sensors that we're under attack. And then basically through our autonomic nervous system, that sends signals to the rest of our body that we're in danger. So we can already see the start of the pathway. And those involuntary bodily functions, such as breathing and heart rate, basically change automatically. There's nothing that we can do about that. But what's really interesting is because it's automatic, when the brain is alerting the rest of our body, it automatically changes. That means that we can do something about to reverse the cycle. And I think these are the things that are really interesting in the practices that Louise is doing, because I think it helps us reverse the cycle of this experience of anxiety. So just another thing to kind of mention there is the autonomic nervous system has two parts basically, and people might have heard about what's called the sympathetic nervous system, as also the parasympathetic. So I thought I'd just mention this really quickly, just because the way that they describe it might be quite useful. So with the experience of anxiety, what happens is the sympathetic nervous system that is triggered. And they talk a lot about this. It's a bit like if you think about a car, our sympathetic nervous system is a bit like pushing the gas pedal. It basically speeds us up. Whereas when we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, it basically acts as a brake and slows us down. And what we know is that some of the practices that Louise will be doing and some other things that I'll be talking about at the end can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which means that we're pressing on the brakes, which means that we can slow things down. Okay, Jenny, so moving on from kind of what happens basically with those two functions in our brain, it basically sends signals to our body, and our adrenal glands are alerted, and basically they what we call our stress hormones, which is adrenaline and cortisol, and they really are just telling our body that something really scary is there and we really need to run away. And they are there to help us, to protect us, because they are basically telling our body that we're in danger, and they're helping us to move away from that dangerous situation. And those hormones are basically got a few functions. One is to increase our awareness, so we're much more alert, and the other is to improve our reflexes, so we are able to fight or run away a lot more quickly. So we can already see that the experience of anxiety through changes in our brain and then sends signals to our body and increases these stress hormones. But the point of these stress hormones is really, if we're thinking about that function of fight or flight, the stress hormones are there to be used up to fight or flee away. But if we're not being confronted with a real danger, like something that we do need to run away from, we can see how those stress hormones are circulating around in our body without us doing something about it. So we're not able to release those hormones. They're just kind of sitting there moving around on our body. And we know that if they're there and moving around, unfortunately what happens is that they can cause our bodies to release even more stress hormones, which then can kind of escalate those worries. So we know that these stress hormones bring about a variety of bodily changes. So if you can move to the next slide, Jenny. And again, I'm sure that everybody's experienced some or most of these changes in our body when, you know, before a medical appointment or before or scan results or before any new treatment has started. So what we know of that fight or flight response, so basically what happens through those automatic responses that I talked about before is our heart rate starts to go faster. So breathing and heart rate are the two things that naturally occur. And then what happens is that our heart rate, because it's going faster, pushes blood to our muscles and to our fighting muscles, but also to our other vital organs. And what happens, it reduces the blood to the skin surface, which can result in pain, pale or flushed skin. That's why people say, I feel really white, or I feel really, really flushed. The blood basically goes to our muscles that are primed, ready for action, so our fighting muscles. And because they're pumped there quite quickly, that's why people might experience a feeling of kind of trembling muscles or shaking. We know also that our pulse rate and blood pressure can go up, which then affects our breathing. So we know, and that's probably one of the most common experiences that people talk about, I feel like my breathing becomes a little bit difficult. I think my breathing tends to become a little bit more rapid and more shallow. So what we know is that when the threat passes, basically, you know, signals, those sensory signals are sent to our brain to say that we're now out of danger. And then our involuntary bodily functions automatically go back to normal. But what we know, and I'll talk about it after the next practice that Louise is doing, but what we know is that when we're faced with what we call a perceived threat, perceived threats are in here, they tend to be generated by our thinking. So often our unhelpful thoughts don't just pass, they can kind of stay and we can ruminate on them. That's why often these bodily changes can continue. So Louise is going to do a awareness practice now that I'm hoping might help with some of the things that I've talked about. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, I like this practice. It's a mindfulness of emotions and a centering practice. So as Rebecca's talked about, when we're experiencing a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, it can be really difficult to find some balance. And whereas the initial exercise we did, the breathing practice at the beginning, can act as a really good anchor in those situations, this exercise is just a little bit longer and just looks at a little bit more into what's going on in the body and allows you to notice some of those sensations and some suggestions with how to be with those. So what I'm going to do again now is just to ask you to take another moment and get yourself comfortable again like we did before, and just allowing your gaze to lower, and if you're comfortable, just gently allowing your eyes to close and just settling into your body now. In your own way, taking a few moments to relax your body and perhaps taking some slow, deep, conscious breaths. And as you feel yourself breathing out, just noticing how your muscles just soften and loosen, and relax and release on each out breath quite naturally. And again, allowing your body to relax into the chair and allowing your breath to find its own depth and rhythm now. Perhaps just noticing how the breath just breathes itself. You don't have to force it, it just happens. And taking your attention now down to your feet. And just feeling the sensations of pressure where your feet are perhaps touching the floor. And just feeling that subtle sense of aliveness in the feet. Maybe a subtle tingling, pressure, or pulsing. And if you're not noticing anything in the feet, then that's noticing as well. And just allowing your breathing to flow naturally, with the intention to check in on how you're feeling, bringing your awareness to your throat, and just feeling into it and exploring the sensations there. They may be subtle or strong. You might notice that thoughts or memories come to mind. Just allow them to come, but bring your attention back to the sensations in the throat. Just allowing your breathing to flow, moving your attention to the center of your chest. Maybe feeling any sensations there, perhaps a slight pressure, or an ache or a hardness. Maybe some resistance to your breathing. Or perhaps it feels soft or comfortable. Just exploring the feeling sensations with a non-judgmental curiosity. And now just bring your awareness to your solar plexus, the area between your chest and your belly. Just exploring the sensations there, noticing any tightness or contraction or shakiness, any numbness or softness. Whatever sensations you find, accept them without judgment. And just be curious as to what's there. And now just bringing your awareness down to the belly, around tummy button and the navel and behind the navel. Just no need to analyze where the sensations come from. No need to worry about whether they're physical or emotional. Just exploring the sensations there. And then broadening the awareness to include the whole feeling line of your being, from the throat, the chest, the solar plexus and the tummy. Just keep the feelings company with that curiosity and compassion, just sitting with whatever feelings are there. And then opening your awareness to include your breathing, the sensation of your feet, the sounds, and of course the awareness of the silent observer, the still presence which notices sounds, sensations, thoughts and feelings. And knowing that meditation isn't passive sitting in silence, it's sitting in awareness, free from distraction, and realizing the clear understanding that arises from concentration. Knowing in the midst of movement and chaos, you can keep this stillness inside of you. And as we come now to the end of this meditation, just allow your breathing to become a little stronger, and perhaps a deep breath or two. And just start to reactivate your body, moving your fingers and toes, maybe having a stretch, and slowly, in your own time, opening your eyes.
Thank you, Louise. That was great, and I think a really good follow-on. After the description of kind of what happens with our body when we experience anxiety, and also really interesting to, I was kind of listening to what you were saying about increasing our awareness of what's happening to our body and noticing those experiences without making any judgment. And also hearing what you said about, despite what's happening around us, we can have some kind of stillness despite going through a difficult situation. So thank you, that was really great. Okay, so for my next slide, what we're going to do is just to kind of try and link it all together, really, in terms of just trying to understand, the connection. So kind of I started with the fight or flight response, and talking about those perceived threats can actually be, part of our thinking as opposed to real threats. So we know that perceived threats can be memories.
Call from 07577777996.
Sorry.
That's somebody's private phone number.
Yeah. My husband's answering it down the other end. Sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. That's all right. So perceived threat can be memories of a previous experience, a previous scan that was really difficult. It could be unhelpful thoughts that could be seen as a perceived threat in our body. It could be stories that we're telling ourselves. It can be predictions about the future, and that doesn't have to just be words. It can be images too, and also judgments about what we think the future is going to hold. So when I've been talking about those perceived threats, that's where these thoughts can come into play. So often those thoughts tend to start with, what if? And I'm sure people will, recognize that in your thinking. So what if, or if I, and unfortunately kind of the rest of that sentence tends to be unhelpful, or tends to be on the negative side. It doesn't tend to be something that ends in something positive. And what we know about those unhelpful thoughts, it can have a connection with how we feel. It also has a connection with our body, like we talked about before, and it also has a connection with how we behave. So I just wanted to put this up to try and help people see the connections between those four experiences. And when we know that they're connected, it basically means that we can put something in place in any of those parts of that cycle that will help reverse the cycle. So, we can do something about our unhelpful thinking, which can evoke, a relaxed state. We can help reduce anxiety with our emotions, and we can also do some relaxation or some awareness practices like Louise is doing, which can help, our stress response within our body. So what I thought I'd do in the next slide, Jenny, is just, we talk a lot in psychology about unhelpful thinking styles. So we don't often talk, or we try not to talk about positive thinking or negative thinking. We talk a lot more about our thoughts being helpful or unhelpful. And we talk about them being helpful because if a thought pops into our head and actually helps us or motivates us into behaving in a way that's in line with our values, then that's helpful. So, for example, if a thought pops into your head of, I look like I'm putting on weight, you know, for one person that might be a helpful thinking style or a helpful thought, because it might motivate them into action. They might decide, oh, well, what's really important is I know I need to do more exercise. You know, I might need to eat a little bit better. But for another person, that thought of, I feel like I'm putting on weight, might become unhelpful because it might demotivate them. It might decrease mood. So instead of thinking about positive or negative, a particular thought can be helpful for one person but unhelpful for another. So when we're looking at unhelpful thinking styles, so there's a lot there, but what we tend to notice for most people, there's a couple of kind of really common ones. The third one down on the left, jumping to conclusions or mind reading, is where we imagine that we know what's going to happen in the future. I mean, they call it fortune telling or predicting the future. And that's quite common in the work that I do with people, that they feel that they know what's going to be happening at that next medical appointment. The next one straight over to the right is what we call catastrophization. And that's basically blowing things out of proportion. Or, you know, we think that, you know, we've had a difficult morning and that means that the whole day is going to be bad. Or we had an argument with a friend, that means our friendship is going to be over. That's where we're magnifying the situation. And the next one down on the right, which we can say should and must. And again, you know, people I'm sure will, you know, have heard these in their own thinking. I should be feeling better by now, you know, maybe, you know, through chemotherapy or after chemotherapy. You know, I should be doing more things with my children. I should be getting on with life. So all these kinds of things really are designed in our thinking. And that's why we call them unhelpful, because they're designed to make us feel bad or feel like we failed or feel like we should be doing something different. So the reason I put those unhelpful thinking styles up, and, you know, I'm hoping that Jenny might send these slides out to everybody, is that I think if that we're more aware of our own thinking styles, it basically means that we can alert ourselves so that that's what's happening. We're in that process of catastrophizing or jumping to conclusions. And if we name our thoughts or, you know, put a label on them, it sometimes can be a lot more helpful than going into that big unhelpful story. So if we look at the next slide.
That one?
Yep, perfect. So along with obviously the two awareness practices that Louise has talked about, I just thought I'd talk about a couple of things that we know has been really helpful in psychology recently, but also in you know, working with people who are going through cancer treatment. So it's basically taken from, and again, some of you might know, it's called acceptance commitment therapy, and it's been around for quite some time. It's not new anymore, and people might have heard the names Russ Harris or Stephen Hay. And basically the acceptance commitment therapy, so acceptance is about accepting where we are at this very moment, and commitment is about committing to a kind of life that's based on our values. So there's two bits of the work. One is about how do we manage difficulty, and the other bit of the work is what kinds of stuff can we put into life that means that we're living a meaningful life. So I basically just kind of used that analogy, face, and I thought if you were to take anything away from this presentation, it might just be to remember that. And we'll go through them one by one. So the F obviously is focus. Focus on what we can control and let go of what we can't. A, acknowledge our thoughts and feelings, which I think we can be helped by some of the awareness practices that Louise has been doing, as well as the coming back into our body. And the final one is engage in what we are doing. So if we can just remember that analogy face, then it might be just something that would be really helpful. So if we go to the next slide, we just talk a bit more on, you know, after focusing on what we can control, the A is acknowledging our thoughts and feelings. And I just put this picture up. So one of the strategies they use quite a lot in acceptance commitment therapy is what we call diffusion. So diffusion is the opposite to fusing. So fusing with our thoughts, which basically means that we believe them. So for example, what if, the next appointment is bad news? We start to believe that thought, believe it as it's a fact, as opposed to just a thought. So what we do is we believe them, we struggle with them, we think about them. But what we're saying is that, is it possible, just like what Louise has been talking about, can we just simply notice them and let them go? So there's a couple of little faces there, and basically what happens is that we move from having that thought, or I'm stupid, or I'm overweight, or to I'm noticing I'm having the thought. So what it does, it just creates a little bit of distance from us and that thought, and we can think about that thought as if we're observing it, as opposed to getting fused with it. So when we think about what thoughts are, it's basically, if you think about how to describe thoughts, they're really just a bunch of words kind of put together, or images or pictures. And if we can think about our thoughts as if, we were driving down the motorway, and we were to see a sign telling us to get off for a certain place, if we can see our thoughts as if it was just written on a placard like that and be able to drive by, as opposed to what happens is when we think about those thoughts, they pop into our mind, we start to believe them. And as soon as our thoughts get entangled with our emotions, that's when they become problematic. So the first thing is acknowledging our thoughts, simply notice them, and not allowing ourselves, or trying not to get fused with those thoughts. The next slide.
Can you get me a cup of Panadol?
The next slide is about coming back into our body. So this really is going along the lines of that Louise has been doing with her awareness practices. So this is just really 5 things to think about. So this is a really good exercise if we're sitting in the waiting room, waiting for our medical appointment or for our scan. And it's basically, slowly just pushing our feet hard into the floor. Straighten our back and spine. So if we're sitting upright and forward in our chair. And slowly pressing our fingertips together. So this is just really about kind of a grounding exercise to bring ourselves back into our body, but it's something that we can just literally do in 30 seconds or a minute. Slowly stretching our arms and neck if we can, and shrugging our shoulders, and do some slow breathing. So that's basically the C, about coming back into our body. And the final bit of the face is about whatever you're doing, let's engage in that activity. So if you're doing something or even sitting, let's just get a sense of where we are and refocus our attention on the activity that we're doing. And we can do that by using our 5 senses. So again, this is just a really simple little strategy that we can do to engage or be present, in terms of where we are and what we're doing at that very moment. So looking around and noticing, it doesn't have to be 5, but some things that you can see. Again, it doesn't have to be 3 or 4, but just noticing some things that you can hear. Notice something that you can smell or taste or sense in your nose, and notice what you're doing. So what I've just put at the bottom is that, what can I do right now? And I think that's just a really important question, is when I talked about focus on things that you can do and let go of things you can't. If we're focusing on something that we can do, what can I do right now, no matter how small it may be, that improves life for myself or others I live with? And whatever that answer is, let's do it and engage in it fully. So just to kind of, next slide please, Jenny, just to kind of look at all of that together.
All right.
It's okay. And I saw this image when I was Googling. I just thought it was really beautiful. And I thought, if we were to just, think about that and even remember that image. And I think if you remember that image, you'll remember what it stands for. And if we remember that, focus on what we can control, acknowledge our thoughts and feelings, come back into our body and engage in something fully. So next slide, please, Jenny. And I think I'm going over time, so I'm going to be really quick because I know Louise has got another thing to do. So I just wanted to finish with you know, all the things that I've been talking about in terms of managing anxiety. It isn't always easy, even though some of the strategies might seem easy. And I think what I wanted to say is that to try and do those strategies with a compassionate approach, understanding that these times can be more difficult than other times. And I just found this quote by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and you probably know her by, she did a lot of work on the grief cycle. And I'll just finish my section by saying the most beautiful people I've known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and they found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. So that's the end of my section. I know Louise has got her last awareness practice to complete, so I'll hand over to her.
Thanks, Rebecca. I think that last quote is just lovely, and all of those things that Rebecca has just been talking about in terms of allowing things to happen and accepting things, and being compassionate for ourselves. Hopefully you're going to be included in the final exercise that we're going to do before we finish, and this is an exercise around noticing those feelings and that it giving you an idea about how to manage those feelings when they come up, which can be really difficult. So we're going to finish with this one. It's a little bit longer than the others, but hopefully it's something that you're going to enjoy. And when we've finished, I will just ring the bell again at the end to bring you back into the room. So again, just taking that moment to adjust your posture and get comfortable. With your feet flat on the floor if you can, resting your hands comfortably in your lap. And again, like we did before, just gently lowering your gaze and closing your eyes if that feels comfortable. And settling into your body in your own way. Maybe taking those few deep, slow breaths to begin with, and noticing again that feeling of relaxation that happens on each out breath. Really listening.
Just got some background noise. If someone can work out that it's their noise, if they could mute their microphone, please.
I'll do mine.
Thanks, Jenny. So just allowing your breath now to find its own depth and rhythm. Just to breathe itself as a way of stilling the mind, disentangling thoughts from feelings. And as you've been practicing awareness of your breathing, you may have noticed that emotions and body sensations continually pull your attention away again and again. So we need to turn toward them with a kind of tender affection and awareness. And there might be a part of your body where you feel grief most strongly, or anger or sadness. Or there might be a part of your body that you maybe sustained an injury, or where you have an illness. So just identify where in your body you can feel discomfort most easily or strongly. And the first step of the practice is just to soften into that location of your body, which means just letting the muscles be soft without a requirement that they become soft. as if you're simply applying heat to sore muscles. Just soften the place in your body. You can say quietly to yourself, soft, soft, soft. And just remembering we're not trying to make the sensations go away. We're just being with the sensations with loving awareness. Just as if you had a child with a fever, by wishing it not to be there wouldn't make it go away. But you might sit with the child with a loving awareness, perhaps tenderly placing a warm hand on the child's forehead in the same way. Just bringing tender, soft awareness to wherever in your body you're feeling discomfort. And now soothing yourself for struggling in this way with this discomfort. Perhaps putting your hand over your heart and feeling your body breathing. Perhaps feeling the warmth of your hand and that gentle pressure of your hand on your heart. And perhaps just soothe yourself with kind words that may arise in your mind, such as, "This is such a difficult experience. May I grow in ease and well-being." Maybe just using some kind words of your own if they emerge. So you can not only soothe yourself in this way for the struggle you're going through, but you can also direct kindness to a particular part of your body that's under stress by placing your hand in that place. Perhaps it's your knee or your neck or your tummy. And to strengthen your attention, you can just repeat soothe, soothe, soothe. And finally, allow any discomfort that's there to be there. We often have a subtle contraction or avoidance within us, and we wish it would go away, but for this moment, just allow the experience to be there. Perhaps there's a pulsation of pain, or if there's a feeling of emptiness in the heart or a lightness in the tummy. Whatever it may be, just allow it to be there, just for now. And go of the wish for the feeling to disappear, and let the discomfort come and go as it pleases, just like a guest in your home. Maybe a guest you're not certain about, but receive guests in a hospitable way. And to strengthen this intention, you can repeat allow, allow, allow. So we're softening the location in the body, letting the muscles be soft without the requirement that they relax. And then we're soothing ourselves because of this difficult experience. Perhaps putting your hand over your heart. Maybe some kind words come to mind, maybe not. And you can direct kindness to a part of your body, perhaps by placing your hand on it, just as if you were placing a hand on a beloved child. And also, we're allowing the discomfort to be there. We're not going to fight it just for now. We're not going to fight it. Just let it be. And you can repeat the words to yourself again and again to remind yourself to incline towards tenderness. You can keep your hand over your heart if you wish. Soften, soothe and allow. Soften, soothe and allow. Allow that area of your body to soften. Bring it soothing, tender awareness. Just allow it to be just the way it is. Soften, soothe and allow. And if you experience too much discomfort with an emotion or with physical pain, you can always return to your breath. You can always go back to the sensation of your breathing. You can take refuge in your breath. You can turn away from the discomfort if you wish. And then, if you feel better, you can return to the place in your body where you experience this discomfort by saying soften, soothe, and allow. Just be in the body with whatever discomfort you're having in a tender and affectionate way, inclining toward an area of your body where you have uneasiness, as if you're a parent inclining toward a beloved child with curiosity. What is it? How do you feel? What do you need? Not pushing the child away and not pushing the experience away, just letting it be. We may wish the emotional or physical discomfort will disappear. But just for now, we're sitting with it with great kindness. Soothing yourself with a warm hand on your heart, or perhaps with kind words. May I be safe and be peaceful and be healthy. May I have ease in mind and body. Some kind words, and still allowing the experience to be there, not resisting, not struggling, opening up to it, softening, soothing, and allowing.
Thank you, Louise. What a beautiful word that soothe is. It's, you know, I hope you feel soothed and softened, just as I do. It's lovely to take a moment out. Thank you, that was beautiful. So that ends our presentation today. So many thanks to Louise and Rebecca for sharing their expertise and their time that they've spent preparing this presentation and being with us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And to you, our members, we're grateful for you joining with us to give this a go and being our guinea pigs. As I said, we haven't done this kind of online presentation before. We've got ideas about doing some more, and we'd love to hear from you as to how you think it worked and what else we could do another time. So we will email you the PowerPoint presentation so that you can go over those practices again, and you can also remember the acceptance commitment theory and that acronym of FACE and the small changes that that tells us to practice in those moments when we all feel anxiety. Yeah, so we will do that, and as we hope this has left you in a good place with some new tools in your toolbox, and we just remind you that we are here to talk to if you do need someone to have a chat with this afternoon or at any time. Remember, that's the role of our Sweet Louise support coordinators. We're here for you. So I'm just going to stop sharing now so we can see if we can say goodbye to everybody again. There we are. Thanks very much for being with us, and yeah, special thanks to Rebecca and Louise again, and